That was the photo op. The church itself is shut down.
That's my thoughts.
We're a great country. That's my thought. That was his photo op. And then, really awkwardly, he asked the Attorney General and the Defense Secretary, really anybody else he could kind of get to come into. Kayleigh McEnany was dragged into this photo op, to stand in front of St. John's Episcopal Church, not to pray, not to confess, certainly. We know the president doesn't do that. No, he went to just stand outside, hold up the Bible, and then have photos taken of himself with his cabinet members. It was surreal. A photo op at the church that he rarely attends. His daughter and son-in-law also on hand. Let me just say something about what the president has just shown us. The president of law and order, as he now calls himself, which is how he pronounced himself, and then he claimed a power he doesn't really have. He can't send the military into every state. That's not law and order. What the president doesn't seem to know or care is that the vast majority of those protesting, they too are calling for law and order. A black man killed with 4 officers holding him down, a knee to the neck, for more than 8 minutes, nearly 3 minutes of which he was no longer conscious for. That's not law and order. That's murder. Stopping and frisking a young black man simply because he's a young black man, that's not law and order. The killing of George Floyd, Eric Garner, the torture of Abner Louima, that's not law and order. The president seems to think that dominating black people, dominating peaceful protesters is law and order. It's not. He calls them thugs. Who is the thug here? Hiding in a bunker? Hiding behind a suit? Who is the thug? People have waited for days for this wannabe wartime president to say something. And this is what he says, and that is what he does. I've seen societies fall apart as a reporter. I've seen people dying in the streets while protesting. I've seen countries ripped apart by hate and misinformation and lies and political demagogues and racism. We can't let that happen here. Of course, violence is no answer, but people protesting deserve answers, and they haven't gotten them, no matter how many black men have been murdered, lynched, imprisoned, mistreated, redlined, blackballed from jobs. We all know it. People protesting in the streets, they know it, and they're tired of it. And we should be too. There's a curfew in New York tonight at 11 p.m. And we remember another curfew, August 1943. That was the last time there was a curfew like this in the city. And you know what that curfew was caused by? 1943, a white police officer shooting a black soldier. The years change, the decades go by, and the sad truth remains. Let's go to first right now to CNN's Alex Marquardt, who was on the street in the crowd just as the mayhem broke out in Washington. I shouldn't even say mayhem broke out. The peaceful protesters were pushed out, and that's what caused mayhem. He's with the protesters now and the police line. Alex, explain what you have seen, what's going on now.
I'm with the few protesters who remain, Anderson. The president, in his remarks, said that the 7 p.m. curfew would be strictly enforced, and it has been. This was a curfew that was put down by the mayor of Washington, D.C., not by the federal government, of course. And now the streets, at least around the White House, where I have been for most of the day, are predominantly controlled, well, certainly controlled, but predominantly occupied by law enforcement. What you're looking at here is a row of DC Metropolitan Police. We have just been pushed back from the intersection that you can see down there where there's a lot more police. They carried out this maneuver that was almost like a lasso, allowing the press to go out, but wrapping around the remaining protesters and presumably arresting them. They are still up there. Anderson, you were mentioning the made-for-TV moment that we saw earlier. It was extraordinary in the moments leading up to that speech by the president, in which he declared that he was the law enforcement president. On cue, the police forces in the police, so DC National Guard and the U.S. Park Police, along with Secret Service, they pushed forward and started aggressively pushing the protesters away from the park. They didn't use, it wasn't just a please move away, we're getting close to the curfew kind of thing. It was with force. It was with horses, it was with tear gas, it was with pepper spray, it was with rubber bullets. I saw an older man getting cornered in an entryway who was getting fired upon with rubber bullets. Protesters going out to try to help him. under a hail of rubber bullets. They managed to carry him away. He looked like he was having some heart trouble. So some incredibly disturbing scenes playing out here, Anderson, tonight. It is the kind of thing, as you noted in your remarks earlier, it's the kind of thing that I've also seen in places like Turkey, in places like Egypt, between Israelis and Palestinians. These are not countries that we should want to be compared to. It is an understatement to say that, to pair the president's remarks that I was listening to in my ear with the scenes that were unfolding in front of me, to say that that was surreal is certainly an understatement, Anderson.
Yeah, well, El-Sisi is the president's favorite dictator. Apparently that's what the president said to El-Sisi. Alex Marquardt, thanks very much. CNN Jim Acosta watched this all from the Rose Garden. He joins us now. Jim, have you ever seen anything like this?
No, Anderson, it was an extraordinary moment. And, you know, we were standing there in the Rose Garden waiting for the president to start speaking, and you could hear the explosions coming from this police and military action that was taking place on the streets of the nation's capital to clear out these protesters from Lafayette Park so the president could have this photo op. And then the president launched into his address. He described himself as a law and order president and threatened to use military force to stop these protests if these governors don't use the National Guard. And we sort of saw all of that play out in real time. Just before the president's remarks, there were military vehicles rolling into the White House complex. They unloaded those forces, and then those forces cleared out the park so the president could take this walk. At one point, I asked the president, how can you defend clearing out a park of protesters for a photo opportunity? He did not respond. A couple of times I tried to ask that question. He did not respond. But keep in mind, Anderson, and you're watching this video now of the president walking through Lafayette Park. You know, this is a park where the protesters have been lined up for days now protesting against the death of George Floyd, and it was just completely emptied out. It's just extraordinary what was done here. And just to echo what Alex Marquardt was saying, you know, we've had this discussion over the last couple of hours of the president potentially using the Insurrection Act of 1807 to help quell a domestic disturbance. That's not what occurred here. They were
Jim,
used
the thing also,
to create a photo opportunity
yeah,
for the president.
Jim, and this photo opportunity, Jim, this photo opportunity, he didn't even know what to do once he got there. This thing was so badly thought out.
This was ham-handed, no question about it. This was bad reality television. This wasn't even good reality television. And the sad state of affairs that we're dealing with tonight in the nation's capital, Anderson, is that we have now witnessed the President of the United States operating outside the bounds of U.S. law and the tradition of what we know to be our democracy, which is the United States government does not use the military against civilians in this country unless there's a damn good reason. And this just wasn't a damn good reason. And
well, also,
all we ended up with was what the President of the United States looking like a wannabe dictator, right. So he could walk over to a church and pretend to be concerned about the church. It's just a sad unbelievable thing.
It's like in some small country that's taken over by some low-level lieutenant, low-level colonel who gets on the airwaves, declares himself the law and order president, and then, has a big show of a photo op, but there's no there because the church is closed, and he's just standing there with the Bible. What is the defense secretary? What is Barr doing? What's the attorney general doing? Walking over with this? Why is there a uniformed military person walking behind the president, going over there like it's this mob?
It's a very good question, Anderson. And the Defense Secretary, Mark Esper, was talking about this earlier today and talking about these protests as battle spaces, as if the people in these areas protesting are enemy targets. They're not. They're American citizens. And on top of that, you asked about the Attorney General. I snapped a picture of the president walking out with Jared and Ivanka and all of these officials. And Bill Barr, the U.S. Attorney General, had a big smile on his face.
Of course.
Why is he smiling after they cleared a park of protesters out of there with tear gas? It's just, it's hard to wrap your head around. But we are descending into something that is not the United States of America tonight. There's just no other way to put it.
Well, also at a time when you're trying to kind of reach out to all the people in America, for the president to do this, and his all-white coterie hanging around him outside a closed-down church. I don't know what message he thinks he's sending, but it's clear who he thinks he's sending it to and what voters he thinks he's sending it to, which is, it seems that this is based on, he talked about the Second Amendment. That's the right he is talking about protecting, as opposed to talking about protecting people's civil rights, about protecting the rights of everyday Americans, to not be killed or not be suspected of a crime just because of the color of their skin.
The right of George Floyd not to be killed by the police. Absolutely, no question about it. And I think, Anderson, one of the things that has to be remembered in all of this is that President Trump, Donald Trump, did not do this by himself tonight. There were other White House officials, military officials, federal employees paid for with our tax dollars, and our tax dollars were used to tear gas fellow Americans. That's what happened tonight in the nation's capital, and the entire world was watching.
Jim Acosta, thanks. We're going to go to CNN's Caitlin Collins. Caitlin, I understand you have some reporting about why President Trump pulled this stunt.
Yeah, we're learning more about what was behind this last-minute photo op. So last minute, we should note that Secret Service rushed up here on this balcony where I'm standing right now, where CNN has been broadcasting for weeks now without any heads up that they were coming up here because, of course, they wanted to have eyes on the president. And now sources are telling my colleague Kevin Liptak that in part the reason the president made this trip outside the gates of the White House, a really rare trip where you do not often see the president walk out of the front door of the White House, walk across Lafayette Square and come over here to St. John's, was driven in part that he was upset by coverage of the fact that he had been rushed to the underground bunker on Friday night during those protests that you saw breaking out here in front of the White House. That is what sources are saying, Anderson, that was in part what part of the decision.
We are in trouble. This country is being led by a man.
He wanted to be seen outside the gates.
Of course he did. He was taken to a bunker, and he's hiding in a bunker. And he is embarrassed that people know that. So what does he have to do? He has to sick police on peaceful protesters so he can make a big show of being, the little big man walking to a closed down church. And then, he always talks about the world laughing, that the world are laughing at the governors right now. They're not laughing at the governors. They're standing in horror over what is happening. The only people that the world is laughing at is the President of the United States. And this event, as I said, if it wasn't so dangerous and disgusting, it would be funny because it is so low rent and just sad. I plan to come tonight and trying to be as calm and reasonable as and straightforward and just doing this hour of news. And this happened, and I just can't believe this is what we have. This is the United States of America. This is the president we have. They wanted a disruptor. Well, yeah, that's what disruption is.
It's so notable because, Anderson, in the Rose Garden, when the president first came out, he said, I am an ally of peaceful protest. But what we watched from up here was these peaceful protesters who had been out here for about 8 hours, the 8 hours that we've been up here. And then we watched them, of course, they got 3 really short warnings. And within 10 minutes, it was crowded down here. And then all of the protesters had been moved down the street for the president to come out, walk across Lafayette Square, and go to this church that he's visited a handful of times during his presidency. And now we know that was driven in part.
They're all for peaceful protests, except never the actual peaceful protest that's happening. Colin Kaepernick, people taking a knee during a sporting event. No, that's completely inappropriate. That's not the right kind of peaceful protest. A peaceful protest across from the White House, Lafayette Park, it's a federal land. That's why they can use federal forces. No, that's not appropriate. I'm mystified by all these people who say they're for peaceful protests. I'm not sure what a peaceful protest is supposed to look like, given that everyone that I've seen so far hasn't ended up so well for those who are being peaceful. And I'm not,
and Anderson,
violence is not an answer. Go ahead, sorry.
We should note who was missing from this photo opportunity that the president did, where he came out here, he posed with the Bible. You saw the attorney general, you saw the national security advisor, you saw the defense secretary. The vice president, Mike Pence, was not here. He did not make this trip with the president. Neither did the first lady, Melania Trump. Really notable not to see either of those figures